Hello and welcome to another episode of The Distinguished Geek. So, the Second World War has ended, and for Marvel, it was all about the girls. This is 1945. So, with the end of the Second World War in 1945, Stan Lee returned home to his former position as editor-in-chief, but he found a whole range of comics that had dramatically changed over the 3 years while he was away, with a new focus on comics aimed at girls, female lead characters, and girl-friendly topics. So in 1945, the superhero genre was less than a decade old, and already the comic book sales were in decline. Only a year after the movie serial of Captain America was released in February 1944, one of his showcases, WWII Comics, was cancelled. As superhero sales dropped in the mid-1940s, I can only assume that the comic book readers were thinking that the end of the superheroes were upon them, and trying to fathom how was this possible. So one reason was that at the end of World War II, a considerable amount of comic book readers were not children, as you may have thought, but young men in the armed services. And upon their return home, their attention focused on starting careers and starting families. In 1945, Marvel was chasing new audiences for comic books, young girls. And 1945 was the year that Marvel released their new heroine, Patsy Walker, in her own comic book series, knocking Miss America off her own magazine, debuting in November 1944 in the second issue of Miss America magazine. Marvel also debuted Millie the Model in 1945 in her own comic book series, and these two characters would become Marvel's greatest successes from the 1940s into the 1960s. So in the spring, Georgie Comics issue number 1 came out. Now Marvel didn't put all their eggs into one basket with humor comics based on female characters, like Millie the Model, Patsy Walker, and even Nellie the Nurse. Georgie Comics series featured an adolescent boy who was bamboozled by beautiful girls around him, which regularly got himself into awkward and funny situations. In September, Animated Movie Tunes issue number 1 came out, Timely Productions' new comic, which was slightly misnamed, as none of their lead characters, Super Rabbit, Ziggy Pig, or even Silly Seal, never appeared in an animated cartoon. Presumably, Timely Productions wanted to persuade the young readers that their funny animals were just as good as the funny animals that they saw in the theatres. And in the autumn, WWII Comics was cancelled, with its last issue being issue number 17, and it must have been quite worrying for the readers because this comic regularly starred Captain America, and it also introduced such superheroes such as the Wizard, Jack Frost, the Defenders, and Captain Terror. Now in the winter, Millie the Model issue number 1 came out. Now there were only 3 comics that were continuously published between the 1940s and the 1960s. Millie the Model was the first of them. The second was Patsy Walker, and the third was Kid Colt Outlaw. But out of these 3, Millie the Model ran the longest, with a continuous run, and wait for it, with 207 issues. It ran for almost 30 years, from winter 1945 till December 1972. Now Millie the Model's origin story was that she worked at Hanover Agency, where she met her boyfriend Clicker, who was a photographer at the agency, and she would regularly go on adventures with her friend Tony Turner and nemesis model at the agency, Chili Storm. And she was created by cartoonist Ruth Atkinson, who also drew Patsy Walker. Mike Skowalski took over as principal artist after the first issue, but later went to work for DC, working on Justice League of America, leaving on issue number 18, and Dan DiCarlo took over as artist and ran for the next 10 years from June 1949 till November 1959, ending on issue number 93. Dan DiCarlo's successor was none other than the man himself, Stan Lee, and artist Stan Goldberg, who brought the comic into the 1960s. Millie the Model became a more significant adventurer. Eventually the series went back to its roots with its humorous tone, and eventually the readers were invited to send in their own fashion designs and ideas in the hope that the artist would use them in the comic. Also in the winter, the other successful heroine was released, Patsy Walker, issue number 1, who debuted the year before in November 1944 in Miss America magazine, issue number 2, and got her own comic book series a year later. Patsy Walker's earlier stories were drawn by creator Ruth Atkinson and Mike Skowronski, the same team on Millie the Model, but her debut issues included Al Hardley and Al Jaffe, who worked on Ziggy Pig and Silly Seal. Patsy Walker would also release 2 more series in the 1950s, Patsy and Hetty in 1952 and Patsy and her Pals in 1953. Patsy Comics ended in February 1962, but she did not disappear. She would pop up in several different magazines until 1976, when she moved to the Hero Comics and transformed into the costume superhero Hellcat. And finally, the third heroine was released, Nellie the Nurse, issue number 1, and just like Tessie the Typist and Millie the Model, she was another young career woman. But Millie the Model would go on and reign the longest, by years, assumingly because she had the most glamorous job. But Nellie the Nurse did hit one milestone, and that was she was the first nurse to be a leading character in a comic book series. So Nellie the Nurse was co-created by Stan Lee, and Mike Skowronski drew the cover of the first issue. So 1945 was definitely female orientated, which was fantastic as Marvel was allowed to open its magic to new audiences. It created new characters, it created new intergenerational characters, and new teams were being born. But that is another year. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a comment below about the episode, and another question just for fun is about to come up, but as promised, the winner of last week's question was Chris Jones, so well done. And today's question is, what enormous act did America perform in this year? Once again, please leave the answer in the comments below, and I'll feature the winner's name in next week's episode. Thanks a lot, guys. See you soon. Bye.
The